Pleased to welcome you to this educational webinar on the Biden climate plan. And on behalf of ASBC, we also want to thank all of the co-sponsors. As an organization of organizations and many businesses, we understand that change takes place when we're all working together and that we become greater than the sum of the parts. So for a full listing, and not to use up the time now, of the co-sponsors, you can check them out on the website. So we really appreciate their support in this event. For those of you not familiar with the American Sustainable Business Council, ASBC is a council of business organizations and companies advancing market solutions and public policies for a just and sustainable economy. ASBC informs and engages business leaders while educating the media and decision makers at the federal, state, and local level about opportunities and policies that could lead to a more just and sustainable economy. We were founded in 2009, and ASBC's membership is both business organizations and companies that collectively represent over 250,000 businesses. Our businesses understand that triple bottom line businesses and stakeholder economy can achieve the benefits that we need for people, our communities, the planet, and business in our economy. So ASBC is raising up the voice and power of business to advocate and advance public policies on climate change, paid leave, race and equity, clean water, safer chemicals, sustainable agriculture, and more. The American Sustainable Business Council has long advocated for numerous policies to both regulate the negative impacts of climate change on our communities and environment and in businesses, and to incentivize the solutions for a just transition to a sustainable economy. An economy that recognizes that environmental protection and regeneration is not only compatible but essential for business and our economy. We also understand the need for and advocate for a comprehensive plan to address the impacts of climate change, which to us means that we need to look across all sectors from energy, transportation, agriculture, infrastructure, recreation and protection of natural habitats, and at the same time, we must address key economic issues, whether it's paid leave, raising the minimum wage, race inequity, if we are to achieve systemic change. ASBC believes that some business leaders and legislators are operating with an old paradigm of short-term profit at all costs, a shareholder economy, and that has caused the problems we face. But now is our time to build a movement of responsible businesses that together can work with government and all other stakeholders to build an economy that works for all, including our planet. Well, that's why we've invited Tom Steyer to brief us on Vice President Biden's climate plan. But before I turn to Tom, I want to let you know that ASBC had contacted the Trump campaign, and we invited them to present on how and if they plan to address the climate emergency. We are still waiting to hear back from them. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Tom Steyer. Tom has left his successful investing business to give his own money, time, energy, heart, and soul to fighting for progressive causes. He soon became one of this country's leading forces in registering more young voters and voters of color, fighting climate change, working for racial justice, and helping secure better lives for Americans. From founding voter mobilization organization Next Gen America to spearheading impeachment with Need to Impeach, Tom has led a number of people-first grassroots campaigns that have recently defeated powerful special interests, right? Winning on these issues. Tom has mobilized grassroots efforts to beat big oil, to win clean air laws, force big tobacco to pay its share of healthcare costs, and close $1 billion corporate tax loophole to fund public schools. Most recently, Tom was a former Democratic presidential candidate and now serves as a co-chair for Governor Newsom's Business and Jobs Recovery Task Force. And today, we welcome him because he also co-chairs Vice President Biden's Climate Engagement Advisory Council to help mobilize climate voters in November. Tom, it's a real pleasure to be with you here today, and we turn it to you now to share your remarks.
David, thank you so much. And let me say, it is a thrill to be here with the American Sustainable Business Council. It really is. This is the most important election of our lifetime. I know that people say that every 2 or 4 years, but if you think about where we are, we're in the middle of the highest unemployment of anybody's lifetime. We're in the middle of a pandemic that continues to rage through our country. The democracy itself is at risk. If you're following the news, there, every other article is about cheating in the election. And lastly, the planet itself is at risk. That's what I'm here to talk about where we are in terms of a sustainable economy, a sustainable country, a sustainable world. That's what this Build Back Better plan is about. And let's take a second to put that into context. The UN has said that we have 9 years from the next inauguration date in January of 2021 to save the planet. We definitely don't have 4 out of 9 years to waste on a continuation of this administration. But this isn't just about getting rid of Donald Trump. This is about turning the page. This is about a new vision for America, a transformation of the framework of what we're doing. And we have the right candidate. Joe Biden is somebody whose policy decisions, this Build Back Better plan, starts with his compassion and caring for people. I'm going to go through the plan, but it all comes from his ability to relate to people across the spectrum of America. I can say this from talking to him. He has deep knowledge of these issues. He has long-standing expertise and experience in dealing with them. But I really believe that the biggest point about Joe Biden as our candidate is this: the moment has found the person. We need somebody to pull us together, to give us a new vision, to enable it, and we have it in Joe Biden. And let me say, I've been saying the moment has found the man. Well, it turns out the moment has found the man and the woman. As of yesterday, we have a ticket, including Kamala Harris from my home state of California, that's going to represent America in a new way and is going to give us the kind of transformation and positive vision we need going forward. I couldn't be more enthusiastic about what's going on. So let me talk for 1 second about the Build Back Better plan. I know we're going to discuss it more. I think it's important at the outset to say this. This isn't just a climate plan. This is also an environmental justice plan. At the heart of this plan is an awareness that our society concentrates pollution, air pollution, water pollution, toxicity in underserved communities, Black and brown communities, who disproportionately are penalized from a health standpoint in terms of where pollution is concentrated. This plan addresses environmental justice. It's not just an environmental justice plan, though. This is also a huge jobs plan for America, creating millions of good paying, organized labor jobs across this country. I started by trying to give just a thumbnail of where we are. We're in the highest unemployment rate of our lives. This is a time for government to step up with big ideas. The Build Back Better plan is a big idea. We're talking about rebuilding America in a sustainable way. This is ambitious, it's progressive, it's equitable, and it's sustainable. We're talking about $2 trillion of government spending in the first 4 years. We're talking about 100% clean electricity generation by 2035. I mean, I'm talking to people who understand what that means, but that is really ambitious. We're talking about net zero, a net zero economy by 2050. We're talking about safe drinking water. I can't give you all the details, but we're talking about safe drinking water for every community across America. Think about Flint, Michigan. Think about the communities in the valley in where I'm from, California. Think about Denmark, South Carolina. We have toxic drinking water across this country. It is a very ambitious plan. It involves retrofitting and upgrading 4 million commercial buildings, 2 million weatherizing 2 million houses, building affordable housing at 1.5 million units, a civilian climate corps. This is a very ambitious and progressive plan. This is a fantastic plan across the board. And let me say this to you guys. I was an investor, as David said, and a business person. I started my own business for over 3 decades. I understand the importance of sustainable business, of the kind of people that are on this call, like Eileen Fisher, one of my heroes. These are people who are not just building an economy, but doing it the right way with the right values. That's why I said at the beginning, I'm thrilled to talk to you because you represent, in my mind, the best of the private sector in the United States of America. And that means the best of the private sector in the world. So I think this is the year. This is the candidate. I have always likened 2020 to World War II. Everybody has to show up this year. I mean, I'm talking to leaders, and I know the people on this call care. You wouldn't be on the call. You wouldn't be a member of this council. So I know you care, so I know you're going to vote. But I think in this year, in this time, in this multifaceted crisis, with the candidate we have, with the ticket we have, the first woman of color to be on a major ticket ever. In this year, under these circumstances, I know you're going to vote, but I think you need to speak out on this. I don't think you can be on the sidelines in 2020 if you're a leader in America. We need people advocating for this candidate, this ticket, and this plan. And that's really what I'm asking the people on this call to do, to accept both the responsibility and the opportunity to be part of a team under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, turning the page for America. That's actually what this candidate, this administration has to do. Change the framework for what we're doing. That's why you guys are on this call, and that's why you're on this council. Because we know we need to turn the page on a failed Reagan revolution. And we have the candidate who's going to pull us together, who actually, the fact that he is such a caring person who relates, who empathizes. You look at our divided country, this is the person we need leading us. This is our time. This is our candidate. So I'm on this call because I am thrilled to talk to you, but also because I am thrilled with what I know you can do between now and November 3rd, which is to advocate for this plan, this candidate, and a future that we actually can be proud of again. So David, thank you so much for having me. I know I'm going to stick around.
Yep. We've got, so Tom, thank you for that. And yeah, what we were going to do now is sort of turn to some of our key business leaders to offer some perspective from their companies and from their organizations and the like. And, and then we were going to open it up to questions for you to be able to answer. But we thought we'd add a little bit of some of the responsible business flavor to what some of these great leaders are actually thinking about and working on. And that's the key point here, is that these are leaders that are not just talking the talk, but they're walking it, and they're out there raising their voices and using their brands as a way to make change. So it is my deep pleasure to turn to Eileen Fisher, the founder of Eileen Fisher, and say no more. Eileen, please.
Well, thank you, David, and I'm honored to be a part of this, the American Sustainable Business Council, and thank you, Tom, for your comments. I'm glad to be here with Mary Ann and Ashley, and David from Joe Biden's campaign. Yeah, I would just start by saying I'm delighted about Joe Biden's commitment to the environment, and of course delighted about his VP pick yesterday. I think that was a meaningful and right choice, and yes to a woman and a woman of color, and yes to everything Kamala stands for, and I'm happy about that. I wanted to say that I think I would say that I would say that the climate needs to be our number one for Joe Biden's agenda. I feel like every other issue is interconnected with climate. As you were talking about, Tom, climate issues affect the poor more than anyone, and people of color. So climate affects social issues, economic issues, and even our current health crisis. So I think that needs to be number one. And I think Joe Biden is uniquely positioned to be a global leader. I think that to heal our relationships worldwide would be so amazing. And he's uniquely positioned, having built so many relationships across the globe. So I think, again, as David said earlier, we can't do this alone. So how we work with our global partners is really critical. So his leadership globally is really important, but also domestically. And I think this, I struggle a lot being a business owner and feeling like, business needs to be stronger. I mean, government needs to be stronger than business, and it needs to regulate, have really strong regulation. And I feel like the companies like mine who try really hard to do the right thing are disadvantaged. Our customers complain about our prices and things like that, and we do the best we can. But we need the playing field leveled. We need all businesses to be accountable and to measure their environmental and social impacts and to be accountable. And I had this thought that what if we had, when we file our taxes, we also have to file and measure and file forms that state our environmental impacts. That would be one way that we could hold all these businesses accountable, and that customers could access those reports and understand how businesses are doing. And because I think customers really want to support businesses that are doing the right thing, but it's hard to judge. It's hard to know which companies you're investing in or which companies you're buying products from and what actually they're doing, because so many companies are so good at marketing that they might just do one thing and you think they're doing all kinds of wonderful things. So to actually measure and track the efforts of these different companies and to hold companies accountable. So we already have a model, the B Corp model. I don't know if you're all familiar, but we do that already. We have to report in and track our sustainability impacts. And so this model is incredible. And I think that it would be so great if all companies had to be B Corps and had to measure their impacts. Anyway, I think, what else do I want to say? I think 2050 is too far away for even net zero. I think we got to push it even earlier, and we got to make it happen. And years ago, we set up our Vision 2020 goals. and they were wildly ambitious, and we had no idea how we were going to meet them. And the truth is, we didn't meet all of them, but we made much more impact. We made much more forward motion than we would have if we hadn't, laid down the goals. So I think ambitious goals are good, and also the tracking and measuring. So I know there's another thing I want to say, but I can't think of it. Besides, we all have to work together. It's just hugely important. That's how we're going to make a difference.
Eileen, thank you so much for your words and for your continued leadership, setting an example for the way business can and should be run. So next, we want to turn to Marianne Howland, the President and CEO of IBIS Communications, an ASBC board member, and also the chair of our Race and Equity Working Group. Marianne. Marianne, you're on mute.
Yeah, I know.
There you go.
So thank you, David, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. And let me say that ditto to everything Tom shared and what Eileen Fisher has talked about, and I love that suggestion around accountability and having businesses indicate their impact. And I'm going to speak a little bit. I'll make a comment about that in my remarks, because I think that accountability translating over into racial equity, income and equity, all across the board, there should be accountability. And so as a business owner, and my business is a small business, Eileen Fisher is a wonderful business. I am a devoted customer, but IBIS Communications and the Global Diversity Leadership Exchange, which is an extension of our business, we're consultants, strategists, and communication linguistics for work in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in business, government, and society. So our work every day is with businesses and business leaders who are on the front lines of doing this work. And so our job is to help them do it better and help communicate those messages and bridge to communities. And in my role with the American Sustainable Business Council, I lead the Race and Equity Working Group, which is an assembly of business leaders across the country who are working with us to do the work as it relates to advocacy. Well, one, identifying policy that supports, Black and brown business owners and communities, but also to think about policy and solutions and work together to help advance those. And what we have learned through our conversations is that recent events clearly have revealed what many of us already know, and that our current economic system is just not working for most Americans. And the challenges such as income inequality and climate change and infrastructure collapse are imposing increasing threats to our economy, our social stability, and in fact, our very existence. And although we understand that climate change ultimately affects all of us, what we clearly get is that more and more how the heavily impacted and most vulnerable populations bear the weight of this crisis, and that comprehensive and systemic action really needs to be taken. And we understand that what we do for climate equity impacts directly social, racial, economic, and environmental justice and injustice. So wherever environments are being harmed or degraded, it's also typically where communities are the victim of social injustice and violations of human rights. And so that's where the work that we have to do has an impact across the board with creating with currently creating systemic racism. And our solutions can eradicate that or improve to create more system equity. So we have to think about this opportunity that we're missing to find and invest in what I call solutionaries. Solutionaries, these are people in communities most impacted by the environment, food insecurity, health disparities. These are the people who have a deep understanding and a personal relationship with the problems and the solutions. There are urban planners for spatial justice, thinking about how we create intercultural encounters with one another. There are builders, there are local farmers. These people are our future for future jobs and for future businesses that are going to lead this movement towards creating environmental solutions that are and help alleviate the impact of what we're experiencing with our climate crisis. As we look toward the ambitious strategies of our climate plan through a lens of incredible opportunities to address the climate change, it's also going to impact the racial and economic disparities that are ripping apart our country. I'm particularly excited, as many of us are, that we've got Kamala Harris on the ticket. I can't contain myself. I was screaming and hollering and jumping in my room because, well, not only because of this incredible historic moment, to finally have the voice of the backbone of the Democratic Party, but also what it means for women and what she stands for. And one of the things that that she stands for is she's leading on the Climate Equity Act, which will build a clean economy and create new jobs and business, and that we know that are going to impact our communities the most. So we're presented with a unique opportunity for transformational change with this new leadership that's coming to office. And I'm just excited to support this campaign and really, as Tom has stated, this is definitively the most important election that in my lifetime that I'm proud to participate in. And my son, who's a new voter, it's an opportunity for him to just think about this, to vote for an African-American woman for vice president. How exciting is that?
Marianne, as always, thank you. Thanks for your words and your work. All right, next over to keep it moving. Ashley Orgain is next. It's a great pleasure. She's the Global Director of Advocacy and Sustainability, the Seventh Generation, which is a founding company as well, along with Eileen Fisher of ASBC. And Ashley, we turn to you now.
Thanks, David. It's a real honor to be here with these women in leadership and also with you, Tom. Such an admirer of the work and the message that you have pushed in this conversation around climate action. So at Seventh Generation, we spend an incredible amount of time thinking about the future, and not just about the future a few months from now. While that is extremely important, we're thinking about the future 7 generations from now. In everything that we do, we're fighting for a future that is healthier, more equitable, and more sustainable than the world that we live in today. And like many of the leaders on this call, we have over the last several years increasingly been adding our voice to the climate justice and equity movement, because we know that the global climate crisis is having devastating impacts on our world right now. In the US and around the world, as has been shared today, the crisis is not impacting people equally. Vulnerable and marginalized communities like communities of color, the elderly, children, and low-income communities are being hit first, and they're being hit hardest. Of utmost importance to Seventh Generation in any climate action plan is a plan that includes a just transition. This means pursuing policies that work to combat the deeply rooted inequity in our society, putting vulnerable and marginalized populations first. Secondly, of utmost importance is putting a price on carbon pollution. By pricing carbon pollution, we send a message that encourages businesses to adopt low carbon technologies, including investing in things like clean energy. And as Eileen said, it starts to level the playing field for all the businesses that are leading today, pushing others to lead for tomorrow. And finally, as the COVID-19 crisis has shown us the importance of early and immediate action, and that government should and take huge steps to protect future populations. As we plan a path to recovery, we have an opportunity to build something better, as has been shared today. We have an opportunity to create solutions that put people and planet first. Thank you for the opportunity and look forward to this discussion and to working with all of you.
Great. Ali Reza, are we ready? We've got Tom. We're going to now take a number of questions, for you. And just while we're teeing up the next person, for those of you seeing on the screen, we also have David Kiva, who heads up the climate work for the Biden campaign and the like. And so, and David will be heading up lots of efforts to sort of build up greater awareness around the plan and sort of the organizing for climate action. So thank you, David, for being a part of this today. All right, Ali Reza, you want to take it?
Sure. First question comes from Frank Knapp from the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce and an ASBC board member. Please go ahead, Frank.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you, David. Thank you, everybody on the call, and especially thank you, Mr. Steyer, for being on this call and doing what you're doing. I am the president, CEO, and co-founder of the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce. I also serve on the board for ASBC. And my question addresses low-income homeowners and renters. And I apologize in advance if this is maybe more specific than we wanted to be, but it is important. In the Biden energy plan, clean energy plan, it addresses the need to significantly expand weatherization efforts, reaching over 2 million homes within 4 years, including slashing the disproportionately high energy burden for low-income rural households and rural communities of color. This plan says it will include direct cash rebates and low-cost financing. I serve on the Dominion Energy Efficiency Advisory Group here in South Carolina. Our experience is that low-income homeowners will not contract for weatherization services, even if it only costs them $20. Plus, many low-income folks rent, and it is up to the landlords who will probably be reluctant to agree to pay any weatherization. So I don't believe that cash rebates and low-cost financing is going to work for low-income homes needing weatherization. Today, weatherization of low-income homes is addressed by the U.S. Department of Energy, funding local nonprofit weatherization assistance programs that weatherize at no cost to the homeowner or renter, only 35,000 homes per year nationwide. These local weatherization programs already have a difficult time with hiring and training workers. So how would a Biden administration dramatically ramp up weatherization in low-income communities, given the problems I have outlined? Won't this require a significant expansion of the Department of Energy's funding and possibly restructuring of local weatherization programs? And what role could small businesses play in addressing this issue? Thank you.
So, Frank, thank you for that question. You are getting down to the nitty-gritty of a really important topic. So let me just put this question in perspective. Buildings are a huge contributor to emissions. In California, my home state, I know that buildings emit as much greenhouse gases as the power sector and as much conventional air pollution as freeway traffic. So the Build Back Better plan's emphasis on retrofitting commercial buildings and weatherizing homes is absolutely appropriate. And poor indoor air quality and poor quality housing are not just climate issues, they are huge public health issues. And they are a big part of the environmental injustice in our society, because not only do they create health problems, they also mean that low-income families are paying more for their heating and cooling than anybody else. Let's start at the 30,000 foot level. The Biden plan aims to eliminate 50% of the carbon footprint in US buildings by 2035. So that means both efficiency and electrification of appliances through an updated building code and new standards, but also what you're talking about, Frank, retrofits and weatherizations. And to do this is a gigantic job creator, at least 1 million good paying jobs with a chance of joining a union. You addressed specifically and said you didn't think it was enough the direct cash rebates and low cost financing options that are in the plan. I also know that this plan directs HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, to work with low-income communities, make them more efficient, and partner with local government and businesses to make sure that the resources are matching the need. It specifically goes to small businesses and local businesses to getting this work done. If you're talking about $2 trillion, that is many, many, many multiples of anything that we have done in terms of an infrastructure bill, a climate bill, or a clean energy bill ever. So what we're talking about is the absolute need to deal with what is clearly one of the biggest and least publicized issues in terms of public health, in terms of environmental justice, in terms of job creation, and in terms of climate. And I think the short answer to your question, Frank, is the money is there. It's specifically designed to go to local and small businesses and to create millions of good paying jobs and to directly address climate injustice in particularly Black and brown communities around this country. And if you need more detail and you want to talk to somebody, I know David Kiva is on this call and we can go into it afterwards, but this plan does address specifically the issue that you're talking about. And it includes the values that everybody's talking about, including the just transition that I know that Ashley was dealing with and that everyone in this call cares about, and that Joe Biden really starts with, which is the rights of working families and working people.
The next question comes from Isaac Graves from Social Venture Circle.
Hi, thank you. Wonderful to see so many of our members on the call today. Tom, you've talked about how Vice President Biden is considering options to avoid bad investments in fossil fuels while taking care of people working in those industries. Many of our members have participated in the Divest Invest initiative over the last 6 years. I'm wondering if you can speak more to the specifics on how investing in those climate solutions can accelerate the transition and support those workers.
So Isaac, thank you. That is a complicated question. Let's see if I can address it succinctly. The Biden plan is doing two things at the same time, and it does parallel the divest, invest idea that you're talking about. First of all, he's going to reverse the excesses of the Trump tax cuts for corporations in general and make sure that corporations pay their fair share. And specifically, he's going to end subsidies for fossil fuel companies. So it's clear that there is the stop doing harm in the way that you budget up front. The second thing is, when you talk about committing to 100% clean electricity generation by 2035, you're sending an absolutely clear signal to companies and investors that clean energy is here to stay and it's the way to go. You know, we're talking about providing certainty so that investors can go forward and make investments. So in addition, I think that idea includes a huge commitment to new research and development towards clean energy. But if you think about the $2 trillion in this plan, honestly, that is just the tip of the iceberg in my mind. What this plan does is it sets up a framework for private enterprise to build a new sustainable America. And that's why I said at the outset, I'm so thrilled to talk to you guys. Because what we're really seeing, if you think about the idea, by 2035, having 100% clean electricity generation, that is a gigantic private investment program in clean energy in this country, gigantic. And by being committed to it and taking away subsidies for fossil fuels, that is the divest, invest program that you're talking about, which has to do, you know, which I've been associated with for a long time, is taking that and really putting it on a gigantic scale across this country. So, you know, I think what we're going to see in the way this works is a huge outpouring of private investment in a new way. Eileen Fisher was saying she didn't think 2050 was fast enough. Well, I think the point here is we're going to see investment, and we're going to see productivity, and we're going to see creativity and innovation. We already are. It's way ahead of what people expected. It's much better than anybody could have hoped for. And we're going to see this country and this system produce a real revolution in a way that's going to sustain this planet. 7th generation. I mean, just to get back to what Ashley was saying, I mean, I think everybody in this call knows that's an old Iroquois nation that you make decisions based on 7 generations forward. Okay, well, that's exactly what this Biden plan is. This is a plan that's good for today. It's good for justice. It's good for job creation and organized labor. And it's good for 7 generations down the pike to make sure that we create the kind of country that is, in fact, sustainable, prosperous, and equitable.
The next question comes from Megan DeBate from the Organic Food Association.
Hi, thank you for including the advancement of sustainable agriculture as a key pillar in the Biden climate plan. As you know, farmers are both victims of climate change, but they're also a key part of the solution to reduce agriculture's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. So how will Biden's climate plan incentivize and expand the adoption of more sustainable farming systems, such as organic agriculture?
So Megan, I don't know if you know this, but Kat Taylor and I have been involved in sustainable agriculture for over 15 years. I think it's going on 20 years now. So this has been something where I think people are starting to realize the impact of a sustainable agricultural, a regenerative agricultural movement, and the need, how much good it can do and how much better it can do in terms of reversing the impacts of the way agriculture is done now and the creation of greenhouse gases. So what does it look like in the Biden plan? Well, it starts with agricultural research, funding for the Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education Program, and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. It starts with making sure we have the procedures and the practices at the best level so that farmers can implement them. You know, part of this plan is a civilian climate corps, which is about conservation and resilient workers across the country, 1 million people. And then I think it involves a review of regulation and roadblocks to new innovations and investing in climate-friendly farming, such as conservation programs for cover crops, other practices aimed at restoring the soil and building soil carbon, preventing runoff. This is going to be a focus of this plan. The only way to do this is by putting in the money and working with farmers. So I think, you know, there are going to be simple things like deploying methane digesters, which have been around for a long time, but I think we're seeing the technology on that come to a completely different level. But we're trying to reach net zero emissions by helping American farmers leverage the new technologies and techniques. So this is going to be a very broad effort with American farmers, recognizing them as a huge source of positive impact for us to reach net zero emissions, and putting in the money in terms of research, putting in the new practices, and helping them get it done.
The next question comes from Vicki Parker from North Carolina Business Council.
Vicki, you need to unmute yourself if you can.
Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. My question is, how will the success of the Biden's climate plan be measured, and who will be held accountable for tracking that progress? Like, Will there be a committee or task force to oversee the implementation of the plan?
Yes. So Vicki, let me say this. You know, I think the way to think about this question is personnel is going to be policy here, because this is a plan that really includes every part of Vice President Biden and then President Biden's cabinet and his whole administration. So I've said it's going to include the Ag Department. It's going to include the Defense Department and the State Departments. You know, of course, it's going to include the EPA and energy. But this, you know, I also said earlier that we're going to be including HUD. So I think what you are going to have here is somebody who's passionate on these issues in Joe Biden. As Mary Ann said, we're going to have a vice president who's just introduced a bill on environmental justice. And you're going to have a cabinet of people who are going to include in their basic job description the need to take into account this broad set of values, which includes climate justice, environmental justice, racial justice, and job creation. So I think this is going to be something, not a siloed issue where we measure it in one department. I think this is going to be something, that was the point I was trying to make about the Build Back Better plan, which is it goes across issues and policies. That it basically permeates, it's a way of thinking that goes to every department and every part of government. And I think that the way that we're going to measure it is going to be twofold. It's going to be on a society-wide measure in the United States to see what's going on the bottom line in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But I think the second way we're going to measure this is going to be how much of a global leader Joe Biden really is on this and other issues. I mean, because we're kind of talking, I was talking about a transformational leader, but we're also talking about a reestablishment of America as a leading thinker, as the chief proponent for justice and democracy and equity around the globe, and in this case, for sustainability. So yes, we're going to have to measure how we do, and that's going to be something that goes across the government and across the administration. But I think more than that, there's going to be a question for the 85% of the greenhouse gases that are emitted outside the United States. How much of a leader are we? Joe Biden is going to be someone who's going to be bringing new technology, new ideas, and real leadership to the world to, in fact, deal with a global problem that absolutely requires a global solution. And by the way, the next UN conference of participants, the COP, is in November of 2021 in Glasgow, Scotland. And that gives us all a deadline. You know, that's when our term paper is due at some point, which is by that point, we'll have seen a President Biden and a Vice President Harris as reestablishing the United States as leadership in this era. And that will be a measure. Their success will be a measure of how far we've come.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Mike Green from Climate Exchange.
Great, thank you so much. And I want to start by thanking David Levine and the team at ASBC and Mary Ann for your wonderful work and support of our work in New England. Echo, of course, the sentiment and support for carbon pricing that was stated by my now fellow Vermonter, Ashley. And also, Tom, I want to thank you for your years of dedication and work in getting my generation out to vote. I've been just calling and texting for now, I guess, 3 or 4 years as part of the Next Gen volunteer team, and just really proud to be a part of the work that you started there. My question is in direct channeling from my family's small business in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. It's a seasonal business, and because of the current pandemic and resulting economic crash, their small business community and its resilience has never felt so fragile. In many ways, this foreshadows how local economies will struggle to respond to the shock or continued shocks caused by the climate crisis. How will the Biden climate plan create a more resilient outlook for small local American businesses? Thank you.
Mike, thanks for that question. Let me ask you a question in return. Where in the Adirondacks is the small business?
We're located on 4th Lake in the Fulton chain. It's called Great Pines Resort. We welcome you there anytime, sir.
I have spent a lot of time in the High Peaks region of the Adirondacks, just so you know.
Awesome.
One of my favorite places. And let me say this, as the co-chair of Governor Newsom's task force on jobs and employment recovery, I see the vulnerability of small businesses writ large. Half the jobs in California are people who work for small businesses, so I know how important small business is. And I also know that small businesses don't have access to the capital markets like big businesses. They don't have the kind of cushion, the kind of resilience as being that big businesses do, and it means that they're the most vulnerable. So I completely get your question. A big part of the Biden plan has to do with increasing federal procurement by $400 billion. And he's pledged to invest that money in a way that ensures sustained and sustainable jobs and small business growth in every part of America. So we understand that what is going on, it's going to be how we direct the dollars. I think that this pandemic has caused the sharpest business slowdown of our lives. And at the front line of that are small businesses. And so I think it's going to be incumbent on the new administration, and Joe Biden definitely gets this, is to make sure that small businesses are specifically included, intentionally and carefully in every part. When we were, that was what I was trying to explain in terms of the weatherization question, that this is going to be a question of reaching into communities and making sure that we're partnering with communities and the small businesses there, that the money is flowing to them to make sure that they can survive what is an incredibly harsh test, which is threatening to all of them, and where those are people who are employing incredible numbers of Americans, and therefore where the employment across this country is going to depend on the survival of those businesses. And that's how, that awareness is something that Joe Biden definitely gets, and that is part of this plan.
The next question comes from Derek Peebles from the American Independent Business Alliance. And I understand his question is very similar to a question we received from 1% for the planet.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone on the panel. Appreciate your time. I thought about what Eileen Fisher said earlier about how things are really interconnected. And so my question really has to, is based around how racial equity will be addressed in the infrastructure part of this plan. And there was another comment about, food insecurity. And just to give a context, I think about economic development and how that will play out as part of the equity and justice piece of this plan. And I understand economic development to be about creating jobs and creating wealth. And I understand community development to be about quality of life. And when we're thinking about climate justice, I think about those two areas that really don't coincide with each other. And so within that context, and looking at the fact that Black and Brown, for the most part, don't have businesses to hand down, or, so I think about entrepreneurship. And so my question is really about how Biden's proposal really addresses equity, but in terms of jobs and entrepreneurship opportunities that will be created as part of this plan.
Yeah.
Tom, before you just answered, let me just let folks, we're hoping that you could, we've got so many questions coming. We've got a few more that I'm hoping you could stay a little bit over past the hour, to take. And then two is to just let everyone know, yes, it's Yes, it's being taped. And yes, we're collecting all the questions from the Q&A, from the chat and the like. And we'll work with David Keeve, we'll work with Tom in order to get you the answers to those questions as well and set up that dialogue in an ongoing way. There's just so much we could obviously fit in to try and get to the key questions that you're all asking. So Tom, back to Derek's question.
You know, when David was talking, I just glanced down at the chat, and my chat has 81 items on it.
And that's not the Q&A. That's not even the Q&A too. But anyway,
so let me say this.
A little more of your time.
I have always believed, and I know that Joe Biden believes, that all energy and climate proposals start with environmental justice. That if you start there, if you start with those communities, if you start with those issues, and you start with leadership from those communities, you get the policies right. And let me say, the fact that the first person he's chosen for his administration, his vice presidential running mate, is a woman of color is not a fluke. I think it's clear from that, but I think it was clear long before that, that this is a president who is going to include all of America very aggressively in his administration and in the leadership of his administration. And let me say, there is a full plan to address racial equity and environmental justice that coincides with his plan to build out clean energy infrastructure. I'll give you some quick highlights, and they address your question, Derek, about entrepreneurship and ownership, which I understand is a critical part of equity and fairness going forward in our society and have always been, key components. He's targeting 40% of the federal government's investment in clean energy to disadvantaged communities. So that goes to the environmental justice issues about health, but also about entrepreneurship and about ownership. They're going to establish an environmental and climate justice division within the Justice Department. So very specifically focusing on this. And he's going to create a climate and economic justice screening tool to identify which communities have been disadvantaged. And that includes economic distress, as well as racial inequality and climate change. So I don't think there's any question that as we build out this clean energy sector, that we're going to be taking into account that Joe Biden absolutely sees the need to take into account the inequalities and injustice, racial inequalities and injustice that revolve around health, but also around job creation and around entrepreneurship and ownership. And let me say one last thing quickly. I can't remember which of the people said you can't separate economic justice from racial justice, from environmental justice. These issues are interconnected at their heart. And I believe this plan addresses that and it has a framework that includes that. Absolutely. And the last thing I'll say is this: food insecurity. Look, I can't stand food insecurity. Those are words. Hunger is the one I get. Hungry children is the one I get. I think we've all got to recognize in this country the millions of people who go hungry and the absolute unacceptability of the idea. Look, that's why Joe Biden is the great candidate for us now. He's somebody who really gets this on a personal level. Those are the kinds of things you can't talk to him without realizing that's where his heart goes. So I'm very, very supportive of this plan. But beyond that, I'm supportive of this man and this team because of how much they care about the underlying human issues and conditions that actually are the motivating force behind this plan.
Thank you.
The next question comes from Juan Verde from the Advanced Leadership Foundation and a board member of the American Sustainable Business Council.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I was wondering if you could please talk a little bit about what exactly is President Biden, should he become the next president of the United States, what is he planning to do to reestablish the credibility of our country when it comes to the international community and the treaty and the Paris Treaty. I think our credibility has taken a huge toll. We have operations in 10 different countries around the world, and I cannot begin to tell you how much our credibility has suffered in the last few years.
One, let me say this. I mean, I did start the need to impeach movement. I do have a strong opinion about this president. I think the first thing that is going to reestablish our credibility is the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I think that is a gigantic step with the international community to say this presidency of Donald Trump was a mistake. It was a blip. We're wiping it out. The second thing is Joe Biden said he's going to get back into the Paris Agreement immediately. And of course he is. I think the third, and that's important, but it's not nearly enough. He's also committed to passing robust climate policy before Glasgow in a year from November. He's also talked about having a global summit on climate change within his first 100 days, explicitly reestablishing our global leadership in general and on this topic in specific. And lastly, Vice President Biden has made it clear that you can't separate climate policy from trade policy. That in fact, the way that we relate to people includes the need for them to be good actors, and we will enable that. We will provide technology, but it's clear that he understands what a big role he can and must play in terms of international leadership. And I think that's something that he's absolutely excited about and has spent decades preparing for. So I'm very excited about what this candidate and this administration can do to reestablish America in terms of a value leader, the value leaders in the world. I think that's going to be one of the critical successes that they're going to achieve, and they're going to start it on day one.
Excellent. Thank you.
Next question comes from Amy Horton from the Outdoor Industry.
And I hate to cut this short, but I'd like to just step in for a second and say, I think out of respect for everyone's time and especially all of the business leaders who have joined us today, who I'm mindful still have businesses that they need to return to and run, this needs to probably be the last question.
Hey, wow. Thank you. I'm glad I snuck in. Thanks for hosting this conversation. Amy Horton, I'm the Director of Sustainable Business with the Outdoor Industry Association. OIA represents over 1,200 outdoor businesses that together generate $887 billion of annual economic impact, create 7.6 million jobs. Our brands, many of the iconic brands, outdoor gear brands that and retailers also reach more than 50 million consumers who are voters and potential advocates. Just a short bit of context maybe to tee up my question, and I think it's a good follow-up to Mike Green's. Climate change is obviously an existential threat to the outdoor industry due to things like reduced snowpack and smoke-filled skies from wildfires and other impacts that just keep people from getting outside. So we're focused on this as a key priority and really a business imperative, not in addition to a moral imperative. We also know that making outdoor gear, making our stuff and apparel, moving it around the world, bringing it to market, all of that also has a climate impact. So our intention is to really take responsibility for the carbon we emit. And our ambition as an outdoor industry is one that is climate positive by 2050 or sooner. So we launched a program called the Climate Action Corps to help the outdoor business community. As Mike said, many of whom are small to mid-sized companies work together to collaborate, to measure their carbon footprints, set targets, take meaningful reduction action, the things that Eileen Fisher was talking about, and share their progress publicly. We think it's a pretty progressive model. We think it's a model that can be scaled, that can be replicated by other industries, and really represents, as you said, Tom, sort of the best of private sector business taking action. And we also hope to see business be incentivized for things like sourcing lower carbon materials, using lower carbon shipping methods, sourcing renewable energy, and other actions. Can you shed a little bit of light on how the Biden plan might specifically incentivize businesses that are taking responsibility to reduce their emissions in line with science.
Yes, and Amy, thank you. I think we talked a little earlier about B Corps,
Yeah.
basically corporations that have more than one bottom line, that take, their responsibilities to justice and sustainability seriously and put that, at equal, as an equivalent measure of their success with their profitability on an economic basis. And so the kind of business that you're describing and that we're talking about is a B Corp type model, is absolutely critical to our economy working for the broad group of people. And I think this plan tries to incorporate that idea, partly by giving American businesses access to research and incentive to establish the kind of market leading practices that you're talking about, partly by taking account of the full life cycle of products and materials that are shipped here from overseas. I mean, I can think of nothing more hypocritical than the idea of creating an outdoor product in a way that is environmentally destructive,
right,
but cheaper at the bottom line for a consumer.
Right.
And that is something that this plan explicitly tries to deal with, so that people are not shipping lower cost products here at the expense of the environment, but that those products and materials have a full life cycle taken into account to protect people like yourself who are doing the right thing by in terms of long-term sustainability for workers and for the physical world. And let me say this. I mean, Kat Taylor and I started a bank, a commercial bank that is a B Corp and that has a triple bottom line, including economic justice, environmental sustainability from day one, and we measure it for every single practice of the bank. And so we know that this model can work, does work in a much broader way than just on the micro level, but also at the macro level. And we have to have a framework that makes it possible for businesses like yours to thrive, because let's face it, I mean, you're talking about the outdoor industry. The outdoor industry literally takes place in the physical world. This Build Back Better plan, the whole point is to preserve the natural world, the physical world that we forget we're living in sometimes, but that is the only world we have. Look, I am absolutely passionate in terms of the questions you're asking on a personal level and a political level and a professional level. I believe this candidate and this administration are our last best hope. I mean, I couldn't be more serious about this. And it's partly, I love to be in the outdoors. I mean, I have spent a lot of time in the Adirondacks, and I've spent a lot of time climbing 14ers in California too. But I'm absolutely passionate about having a president who restores values to the United States and who puts this at the heart, understanding the seventh generation has got to exist, has got to be safe, and has got to live in a world where they can thrive too. And that's really what this plan does. That's really what Joe Biden is about. And I don't think at any point we can forget that includes equity. And his choice of a woman of color to be vice president is an unmistakable statement to the country and the world of where we're going, which is completely different and much, much better. So in talking to people who represent the best of business in the United States, I really think we all need to be at the forefront of making sure this happens in November, because the alternative is terrible. And the question here is something that's fantastic.
So, Tom, I'm going to turn to David Keith for a moment, but I want to first just invite everyone to recognize and to join with, the American Sustainable Business Council and the others to actually use our power as businesses to do the advocacy, to do the lobbying for the public policy. Not enough anymore to just be a good business. Now we have to be the advocates and the power behind all this as well, so we can usher in the systemic change that we've been talking about for a just, sustainable economy and society. And of course, we're calling on businesses now to actually use your platform to encourage your employees and customers to get out, to register, to get out, to vote, etc. And even to offer your employees time off to vote is one of the campaigns that we're running. So David, I'll turn to you for a moment, and then I'll say the final thanks and we'll close it out.
Certainly, I just wanted to say thanks to Tom Steyer. When we asked Tom to join our campaign in a formal way as our Climate Engagement Advisory Council co-chair, we weren't certain how much of his time we would get because of his commitment to the state of California that I know he takes very seriously, and the many other things that he has going on in the world. We are thrilled at the amount of time and energy and dedication that Tom has given to us, including really being put through his paces by this group on this call today. This is such an impressive group. We've had nearly 400 people on the call. Almost all of them have stayed overtime to hear this. And the questions that we've seen asked, both in the comments section and here in the panel, show that this is a group that knows its stuff. I hope sincerely that President Trump's campaign responds to you and sends a representative, because I want to be here for that discussion and be a fly on the wall and hear their responses to your questions. There was a question earlier about accountability. It's very clear that if we win this election, that you all as a group and individually will be the voices who work to make sure that we keep our campaign's commitments and campaign's promises. And if we're fortunate enough to be in government, we look forward to owning that responsibility. But first we need to get there. So over the next 82 and a half days, I hope that in an appropriate personal capacity, every single one of you takes a clear look at the choices before us, decides that Joe Biden is the only choice for a sustainable planet, and volunteers your time, resources, energy, and efforts to helping get us over the finish line. Because if you do that, we believe that we have an incredible opportunity before us, because Joe Biden can be the first candidate ever in our history to campaign on climate and win on climate. So thank you all very, very much for having us here. It's been an honor. I've learned a lot in the process. David and everyone associated with the American Sustainable Business Council, you all do an amazing job and have been incredible partners to us. And speaking from somebody whose paycheck comes from the Biden for President campaign, we are all impressed, and I'll carry this back to my colleagues within the campaign. And thank you again to Tom for your generosity with your time and expertise.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Tom, Eileen, Marianne, Ashley, all of the co-sponsors, and all of you for joining today, but also for the work that you do day in and day out. So we look forward to the ongoing work. It's all about getting it done now. So onward. Thank you all.
Thank you.